Okay, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Chris Frankhauser, Senior Director of Marketing here at Deep Lens. We're excited to have you join this extremely important topic, the critical intersection between patients, sites, and sponsors in cancer clinical trials. Before we jump right in, do want to talk about some housekeeping. We will introduce the panelists. We'll go through the webinar objectives. And then we'll jump right into some Q&A, and we'll hold questions till the end. If you could, please send questions directly to me, Chris Frankhauser. So with that being said, we have a lot of great points that we want to cover, but first and foremost, let me introduce the panelists to you. Our first panelist is Kent Thelke. He's the Chief Scientific Officer and Executive Vice President of PRA Health Sciences, a global contract research organization. With 30 years of experience in the drug development industry, he has oversight of medical affairs, scientific affairs, and pharmacovigilance and patient safety. Mr. Thelke is also responsible for all aspects of digital health at PRA Health Sciences, which includes mobile health, telehealth, connected health, remote patient monitoring, EHR integration, e-source technologies, patient experience, and virtual clinical trial services. He's also responsible for the strategic vision regarding the deployment of clinical research as a care option, utilizing virtual decentralized trials, and connected mobile health as a means of ensuring patient care and business continuity during the COVID-19 pandemic, and how these solutions will translate into the new normal for the drug development paradigm moving forward. Thank you, Kent, and welcome. Our next panelist is Dr. David Braxton. He's a practicing anatomical and clinical pathologist who is board certified in molecular genetic pathology. He serves as Chief of Molecular Pathology Services for an academically affiliated community cancer center in Southern California, as well as Vice President of the Board of Directors for his private medical group of more than 30 pathologists, which provides services to multiple hospitals in Southern California. As Chief of Molecular Pathology, Dr. Braxton is deeply involved in precision medicine initiatives and has implemented systematic approaches to expanding access to precision medicine diagnostics, genetic testing, and clinical trials. Welcome, Dr. Braxton. Thank you. We also have as a panelist Terry Conneran. Terry is a three-time cancer survivor and married mother of 3 young adults residing in Charlotte, North Carolina. She's the director and founder of KRAS Kickers, director of Live Lung International Relations, board member of the Dusty Joy Foundation, and member of Lung Can's KRAS Biomarker Group and the National Lung Cancer Roundtable. She's also an active advocate, speaker, and volunteer engaging with several cancer organizations. Terry loves to connect, share stories with others, and says her priorities in life are faith, family, and she makes a point to find time to laugh and learn daily. Terry, thanks for joining today.
Thank you.
And last but certainly not least, we have Dr. Kamala Madali. Dr. Madali is a biotech, pharma, diagnostics, and life sciences executive and board advisor with over 17 years of deep expertise in precision medicine. She currently serves as Vice President of Strategic Alliances for Deep Lens. Prior to Deep Lens, Dr. Madali served as Chief Scientific and Commercial Executive for many notable Fortune 500 companies, where she led strategic initiatives to foster positive growth in precision medicine. She also served as an executive advisor for several healthcare technology companies focused on artificial intelligence, blockchain genomics, nutraceuticals, and bioinformatics, and biotechnology companies focused on unique precision medicine-driven solutions. She's an active leader in precision medicine and a patient advocate, serving as a board member for several US and international-based organizations working to foster knowledge about cancer, rare disease diagnosis and prevention, and disease management. Dr. Madali, welcome, and thank you for joining.
Thank you, everyone.
So a couple of objectives that we're hoping you will get out of our time today is to discover the realization of precision medicine. artificial intelligence, and mobile technology. We hope that you have the opportunity to learn more about game-changing models in cancer research and improve recruitment and biomarker-based clinical trials. So this question is really going to kick us off today, and this is for all the panelists, and it's a big one. We'll start with Terry. Terry, what is the current state of clinical trials in cancer?
You know, there are a lot of trials out there, and fortunately, we're engaged in them, but there's not enough clinical trials and there are not enough patients involved with them, particularly in the KRAS area.
Great. Dr. Braxton, how about your unique perspective on the current state of clinical trials in cancer?
Yeah, it can be very overwhelming right now. Even though there may still be a great need for more clinical trials, we do have access to more clinical trials for some of our patient populations. There's certainly a greater number of biomarker-driven clinical trials and biomarkers being tested for out there. We also have more clinical scenarios that sort of spread the patients out over certain, care pathways. For instance, 5 to 10 years ago, we had very limited options for somebody with, say, metastatic pancreas cancer or unresectable pancreas cancer. Now patients are surviving longer based on these new therapeutics like immunotherapies and cellular therapies. So they're presenting with unusual clinical circumstances that we may not have seen 10 years ago. And so there's always a question of what do you do with those patients? Do they qualify for clinical trials? Maybe they qualify for more than one clinical trial. So which one's the best for them in their unique clinical scenario? So it can be very overwhelming for a small team of precision medicine doctors to sort through all of these variables and keep track of what's going on in the state of clinical trials right now.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I would tend to agree, Dr. Braxton. I mean, your head probably has to spin every day with all of the information and what you need to know about each individual patient. And I think that's a great segue into Ken. What's your perspective on the current state of clinical trials today?
It's a little bit schizophrenic, right? So on the one hand, you have all this phenomenal growth and technology and advancement in medicine, whether it's molecular pathology, whether it's precision medicine. We have a wealth of therapies, as Dr. Braxton pointed out. We have diseases today that, 5, 10 years ago, everybody just died. And today we have second, third, and fourth line therapies. In some cases, we have, for the rare tumor types, as many trials as there actually are patients total in the world. And so, we suffer from this wealth of advancement. At the same time, the inclusion of cancer patients in trials is really sad. So today, roughly 3 to 5% of eligible oncology patients will participate in a clinical trial. The bulk of community physicians, to your point around the kind of absolute avalanche of data, most community oncologists don't have the ability to keep up with the number of advancements in care. And so what we lack today is, in oncology, clinical research as a standard care option. What makes me concerned is that it means most oncology patients are not probably getting best possible care if they haven't been evaluated for a clinical trials of care option. And from an advancement perspective, if we could get more patients involved in trials quicker on the oncology side, we could actually get some of these drugs to market more quickly. And what that means is more patients have a likelihood of either changing their disease paradigm or their length of disease, and in some cases curing their cancer. But without that, what we see is sadly a number of patients not making it. And so there is this kind of weird dynamic, right? We're on one side, we're moving at lightning speed. At the other side, in 10 years, we have seen very little movement in the inclusion or the numbers of patients included in trials. And certainly that varies by tumor type, but it is a complex problem, and COVID has made it even more complex.
Great. How about Dr. Madali? What are your perspective? I mean, obviously, you bring a wealth of knowledge, a wealth of experience, and with this being such a diverse panel, what are your thoughts on the current state of clinical trials in cancer?
When I put on my scientific hat on behalf of the industry, as Kent indicated and Dr. Braxton and Terry through our own experiences, amazing advancements we had, really rocket speed. The biggest problem is awareness and adoption. We are depending on the conventional ways and conservative ways. We have still not yet really deeply connected with the community, which Kent highlights and which Dr. Braxton represents, which is one of the most open-minded community oncology centers we have ever come across.
Mhm.
So really, I think the main issue here is how do we really connect better with the patient? How do we connect better with community networks who are tremendous influencers because they are actually seeing close to 70 to 80% of cancer. And then how do we bring more and more responsibility from a patient perspective? Because at the end of the day, it's the patients who really are, taking the treatments or any sort of novel investigative therapies. So really, it's an industry-wide issue speaking about how do we really try to come up with processes for really tackling system-wide issues, meaning hospital or health system, and then physician factors, because it's a wealth of information coming in. No one can even keep up with it. Dr. Braxton might be good at it, somebody else, an oncologist in the network might not be. So you need a universal visibility of what's out there, and really an automation aspect wherein constant reminders, right? With today's world, so much information, it's very hard. Pretty much you're asking for an elementary schooler, look at a pre-high school book, right? How do you think of high school, right? It will be daunting for them. So you have to take them in guiding steps. So there are really several technologies which can address many of these scenarios. And then patient experiences. I think Terry will cover some of those wherein really sharing more and more positive experiences, even within this 3 to 5% of enrolled patients. And they'll move the needle hopefully to 10% because US, which is the most advanced landscape in innovation, we have lower enrollment rates compared to ex-US in these scenarios. So really, it's a system-wide issue for us. How do we leverage clinical trial, which is clinical research, as a care option as early as possible?
Mhm. Mhm. You touched on something, and it's about the patient, right? Dr. Braxton, Ken, you talked about just evolution. You talked about care providers being inundated with just so much information. I'd like to share, if I can, Terry, transition to you, and maybe you could share a little bit about your specific story. I know I touched on it briefly during the bio, being a 3-time cancer survivor, but we're all in this business is to help patients, right? And just would love to have you share with the audience a little bit about your story.
Okay, be happy to. Thank you for asking. Very high level, just shy of 4 years ago, I was diagnosed with stage 3 lung cancer. I went through treatment and had no evidence of disease after some surgery and chemo for nearly 2 years. After that, had 2 recurrences that resulted in radiation and an ablation. All that leading up to just shy of my 3rd year cancer anniversary, as it were, I found out that I do have a biomarker that's driving my cancer, called KRAS. Now, it had been on the report. Because it was unactionable, I didn't know anything about it. And at the same time, I did receive adequate care because obviously I had been, no evidence of disease. And so I was benefiting adequately, but I didn't even know what it was that I was looking for. So if I was looking to get engaged with a trial, if I was looking for information, if I was looking for what's coming down the pike, to get that hope, lung cancer survivors are, still not where it ought to be in 5 years. And that being said, just because it was unactionable today doesn't mean it's unactionable in the future. Fast forward, even today, just shy of 4 years later, same exact situation, same exact knowledge base, my treatment would have changed. in that short period of time. In fact, I think it probably would have changed within about a year's span of time. How a doctor can possibly keep up with it, I don't know. And it does matter that it's personalized because, I mean, for me, I'm the person, right? I'm the person in the personalized, right? And although I know that they have so much information, I want to help. And to me, that's very empowering as a patient, be able to take the lead, take initiative, and be able to look. And even if it's not for me individually looking for myself because my mind's mush going through treatment, right? My family can help and they can reach out, and it gives us something that we can do so we can proceed. And then I can bring that information to my doctor. So that being said, that's how I ended up founding the KRAS Kickers around what's been an unactionable mutation that is now looking like we may possibly have potential treatments coming forward down the pike. And so now we're rallying around that, not just because it's KRAS, but because we recognize the level of importance of clinical trials and knowing what's there, knowing the research. There's no way a doctor can keep up with everything all the time if they're just generally applying to everybody. They want to be able to help, and we want help. And so this needs to be part of the partnership. The voice of the patient needs to enter into the decision process, and we need to at least be given the option to become educated in what it is we need to know so we can find that out and participate and help.
Yeah, thanks for that, Terry. And I think that really is a good lead into Dr. Braxton. A question for you. You know, Terry alluded to it, right? It's her treatment would have potentially changed, right? So what progress over the last few years have you seen in the realization of precision medicine to treat patients like Terry with the genetic mutation?
So there's been, a tremendous amount of progress in precision medicine just over the past, 5 years I've been in this position here in the community. And just over that course of time, we've really seen, a number of different areas sort of open up. And we sort of categorize those as, your biomarker testing is one area, your therapeutics and options for treating the patients is another area that's opened up. And then what we also consider here in the community is lowering the adoption barriers. A lot of our community-based oncologists don't have the resources, they don't have the expertise to actually turn testing and therapeutics into a treatment plan for patients like Terry. So, it's really been quite fascinating to watch, the progress. 5, 6, 7 years ago, we were starting with 26 gene panels for comprehensive profiling. Now we have whole exomes, so that's 22,000 genes, 20,000 genes. We're also getting RNA sequencing, so whole RNA sequencing I can get, and we're starting to see the emergence of proteomics. So just the biomarker testing has exploded on the tumor testing side. So that's what we call somatic testing. We also have, opened up a pipeline for germline genetic testing. So the inherited mutations somebody may, get from their parents can often determine what types of cancers they get, where they get them, and what treatment options are available. So we have to have genetic counselors or a physician willing to do that kind of testing and present those options to the patient and the patient's treating providers. And we're seeing huge amounts of adoption right now in the liquid biopsy space. And that's going to really be game changing for a lot of patients. Not just diagnosis and biomarker testing for some of these liquid biopsies. We're now starting to see that with what we call minimal residual disease testing with solid tumors. 5 years ago, minimal residual disease testing for solid tumors using liquid biopsy, that was a dream. That was not reality. And so the amount of adoption and technology we have now to say, after somebody has their surgery to remove a tumor, is there any tumor DNA still left in that patient, and can we treat them more aggressively to prevent a recurrence? That is now starting to open up a lot of options for research and development. And on the therapeutic side, I believe 2018 we had record numbers of oncology drugs approved by the FDA. I keep being told by our developmental therapeutic director that there's pipeline after pipeline of drugs coming out. It's a tidal wave. What are we going to do with them? The drugs that are coming out of these pipelines in development now are way better than what had been coming out of development programs in the 80s and 90s when my mentors were starting to run clinical trial programs. So, and then you couple that with the immunotherapeutics that are coming out. We're seeing the biologics like PD-1 inhibitions, and we're actually starting to do clinical trials for cellular therapies here in the community. Not just CAR T cells, but NK cell therapies are actually starting to be sort of off the shelf, ready for clinical trials. And that's a huge, huge change just from a number of years ago. So the testing, the therapeutics is incredible amount of progress. And what we've specialized here in the community setting is, okay, we've got to expand the testing, we've got to expand the access to some of these therapeutics, and we have to then lower the barriers of adoption. And how we've done that is we've set up routine molecular tumor boards, we've integrated in molecular testing to our standard tumor boards, and so our molecular tumor board really serves as a forum for having our genetic professionals, a genetic counselor, a molecular pathologist, a genomic scientist, or developmental therapeutics team to field questions and concerns from our community doctors presenting patients and saying, hey, is this patient right for a clinical trial? What clinical trial might that be? So having that kind of a forum out in the community is incredibly important. What we've also done to lower the adoption barriers is standardize the molecular testing in a centralized fashion, either in a pathology department or it can be done in a cancer center, and oftentimes coordinate that testing. Tissues are limited, they may be very small biopsies. What happens when you run out of tissues, can't get the whole test done? Who's going to follow up with that? That is a big burden for a single oncologist out in the community to really take a hold of that and manage that process. So we've taken that off the plates of our community doctors here and coordinate that testing. And so on top of that, you have to expand the clinical trial programs. We have to bring in new trial sponsors. We have to set those up. And one of the areas that we've seen actually some vast improvements is on the payer side for the molecular diagnostics. We've brought in some of the local HMOs, and we have IPAs here in California. And we've sat down and talked to them and explained, why we need greater access to some of these testing. And the payers have begun to pay a little bit better. There's fewer of them requiring prior authorization for molecular testing. So that's opened up our program where we can standardize the diagnostic testing. So I really think that there's just been a tremendous amount of progress across those three areas with testing, the therapeutics, and then the amount of support we can provide for our community here.
Yeah, I guess just to piggyback a little bit off that, Dr. Braxton, with that tremendous progress that you've had, how has the COVID-19 pandemic impacted your clinical trial recruitment at your cancer center?
Yeah, so it's definitely had an impact, especially when there was the lockdown in place. We had to suspend all non-interventional trials. So we had some, trials going on that weren't therapeutics oriented; they were observational or genetic testing associated. So we had to completely suspend those. Now, just getting the patients tested that were still coming in for COVID, we had to get them all tested. There was obviously backlogs of testing early on. We still have hiccups every now and then where, a test won't be ready for a procedure or something like that. And so it's caused a little bit of backups and delays in just getting patients in and out of the hospital. Often, and one of the big shifts for our clinical research team was, we had suspended the non-interventional trials. And now we have a bunch of COVID clinical trials. We had the remdesivir trial, the plasma trial, all that. So a lot of the focus from our clinical research staff went from cancer into actually signing up patients that were in the hospital, in the ICU, that had COVID, that needed these kinds of interventions, these experimental interventions. And the fallout is going to be, every hospital across the country has been dealing with the budgetary constraints that COVID has caused. It's really been a big disruption to the hospital-based business and private medical businesses across the country. We've had furloughs, we've had staffing limitations, and so a lot of our projects that we had wanted to install here in 2020 have now been bumped over to 2021. So it's going to slow down some of the implementation of some of our other precision medicine initiatives here.
How about from your perspective, Terry? I mean, when you think about the narrow window when patients can be treated, how does COVID-19 impact patients, right, in getting the best precision medicine therapy options, especially right now during the pandemic, right?
Yeah, on a couple different levels, COVID impacted us. In general, your health issue is already there, and so you've already become more solitary as a result of having cancer, going through treatment, having a lower immune system, and then COVID hits, and you're even more frightened by it. So that's part of it. That's just if you've already been diagnosed. And then there's the patients that are currently going through treatments and the fear factor going into the hospitals, getting the treatment, ongoing, the different, there's so many different levels of barriers just over and above what would be a normal problem to, just show up for radiation or, for chemo or whatever. As far as health issues and being able to drive and transportation and how you feel and getting to the doctor and getting paper towels and, and having those sorts of just like day-to-day necessities and be able to function as a human being, let alone as a patient that has a cancer. You kind of throw at that our concern right now is in the community is that patients have put off any sort of diagnostics. They've put off any sort of screenings and scannings because of either the systems are closed down or fear or just a number of different issues. And so even though we're going to see that less people are being diagnosed with cancer, that doesn't mean less people have cancer. It just means less people are being diagnosed sooner. And so they're not getting as in front of the treatment as they potentially could be, which is part of the problem. And then you're throwing out the sad reality of most patients don't receive the precision testing that they need for what we like to refer to consistently as comprehensive biomarkers to reduce confusion between somatic and genetic and genomic. We've just gone with one simple term across the community as comprehensive biomarker testing. So, many of them don't even receive it until phase three or phase 4 or stage 3 or stage 4 of cancer. And that's if they're fortunate. As we're starting to see that it's not about where in your body, what real estate location it is, it's more about what type of driver you have that's driving the cancer within your body is becoming more and more crucial for us to have the testing, for us to be able to get the information, for the doctors to be able to stay abreast. And honestly, I try and focus just in one very tiny, small part of the cancer community. And I don't know how y'all keep up, to be perfectly frank with you. And so we have to be able to use the fancy calculators we have. Let's use the artificial intelligence. Let's use the computer systems. Let's take what we have and apply it to what we can do with it. As we kind of become more Star Trek, right, in our reality, let's actually take those things and use them for the benefit. Doctors want us to get healthy. We want to get healthy. Well, we have the common goal, so let's move forward as far as being able to find the barriers that we need to get the testing so we can get the treatment so we can do better. And there's a number of levels, but first thing is getting the testing and knowing about the trials and knowing what you are so that we can move forward with it.
Yeah, I mean, you talked about, the Star Trek, right? And, us on the solutions provider side, you know, those are how we're trying to help, right? So I'm going to actually transition over to Kent and Dr. Madali. Ken, I'll start with you. How can technology play a role in precision medicine, especially with you and your team at PRA?
I mean, I think that it's multifactorial. So, you know, the stool we have, the legs are kind of wobbly and we don't always have 3 legs, right? So, you know, combining Dr. Braxton's comments and Terry's comments, I mean, first you've got to educate everybody that the comprehensive genetic biomarker testing is available. The second piece is once you educate everybody that's available, you actually have to do the testing. And then once you do the testing, you have to make it actionable in a way that helps the patient. And so, you know, there is this kind of complexity, and you need all of those things done. On top of that, once all of those pieces are done, you know, to Dr. Brax's comment amongst COVID, and even before COVID, we saw this as a challenge, right? Oh, sorry, COVID, I've got a dog at home. So I think even amongst COVID, right, you need staff that can do everything they need to do, which is search through a patient's records, through the comprehensive biomarker status, and then link all of that information to a very complex protocol that has inclusion-exclusion criteria. And so if your research staff has been moved to COVID, or if your research staff has been furloughed, then what happens to the patient that actually got that biomarker test done but hasn't made it actionable? And so, you know, the technology that we are looking at today is really focused on how do we enhance that that luck of the draw to make it more systematic, right? Patients should not have to rely, patients should not have to rely upon luck of the draw, right? And so to ensure that doesn't happen, if we utilize technology to systematically review all of those biomarkers, to systematically review the inclusion-exclusion charts, then we can match patients to trials based on that biomarker status and take the luck of the draw out of it, right? Patient survival should not depend upon who they know, if they got treated at the right cancer center, if the cancer center they got treated at does comprehensive biomarker testing, if they do that, do they have the right trial open? I mean, you know, to Terry's point, how many hurdles can we put in front of a patient in order to make sure that survival is achievable? And so the one thing that we do have the ability to do today through technology is to utilize artificial intelligence, algorithms, data mining, to systematically take that manual process away and match patients to trials. Match that piece of making it actionable.
Dr. Madali, how about from your perspective?
Kent, such a comprehensive perspective you shared. You really nailed it from the patient's perspective, from the physician's perspective, and overall from the industry's approach perspective. As we are talking today and what Terry had shared through her journey, and then Dr. Braxton has also shared about, today we are able to design so many novel drugs, novel tests, because we are able to understand how complex really cancer is. And just trying to take back every one of you hearing to this panel discussion is, we have really moved from 6 hallmarks of cancer to more than 12 or 13 or 14. Every year, we are really expanding those hallmarks, what is really driving cancer. That means you're seeing more and more insights about, okay, how do we really understand this particular patient's biology in this particular context with this particular cancer type. Lung is a good example. Started with KRAS, EGFR. Now we are talking about very rare sort of mutations, and now it's proteogenomics. So technically, when you look at just from a testing perspective, so the comprehensive biomarker testing, which Terry alluded to, at any given point, you're talking about just from genomics, you might be dealing with 4 or 5 companies down the road. Biopsy, MRD, somatic, germline. There is no one single player that can provide, but then given the complexity of our regulatory and reimbursement landscape of United States, right? It's all reimbursement driven and everything. So you're not going to have one centralized player. And then apart from that, you need to have a universal view of the patient's profile. I pretty much tell everybody, what if LinkedIn is a paid version? Just with unpaid version, you have such good visibility about a person, right? That you want to network with or you want to talk to with. A paid version would have much more deeper details. The same way an oncologist or a clinical research coordinator should have a deeper view of a patient's profile. And it's not just about today. We're all learning through experiences like Terry and also through our friends and family and industry that indeed you have to longitudinally follow up the patient, because the same patient can relapse and you might have to really have a holistic view. What has been this patient's history? And there should be recurrence of testing. Testing is not a one-time point scenario. Here we're talking about constantly changing. So really technology is going to address a lot of barriers about how do we, first of all, make sure that folks like Hogue who have adopted comprehensive biomarker testing at stage 1, that's wonderful to hear. Stage 1 in lung cancer versus, as Terry said, at stage 3 or stage 4, patients being tested. Fair. And having that open dialogue might be these data-driven insights that can be shared with the insurance companies, which would actually give more relaxation for value-based reimbursement to cover more of the testing that's coming down the pipe. And then AI-enabled solutions like Kent has alluded to, which would actually give more and more visibility and then really position the patients as early as possible in the oncologist viewpoint via integrated virtual tumor boards. That's the power of technology, wherein you present the options of trials as early as possible, because you're talking about a very narrow window of opportunity. Few weeks sometimes. The patient is switching from one line of treatment to other line of treatment. And once again, all this data have to be tracked, because these real world data is being encouraged, insights into this data is being encouraged by FDA. And if another drug is being designed for, say, a second line of treatment or even first line of treatment, it would even push the guidelines wherein we might see some of these novel therapies come as first line of combination treatments or even standalone. There's a lot of benefit really of technology from adopting, number one, testing, adopting trials, and also obviously adopting the right treatments and bringing the right changes possible down the road in every angle from a therapy perspective.
And I think the other piece that's missing, Kamala, and this is an industry issue with healthcare, is we still don't have a way to ensure that we are connecting a patient's journey to everyone, right? So if you see one doctor here and one doctor there, and so we look outside, and I know that, Deep Lens, and you're aware of this as well, we look outside of the healthcare industry for best practices for AI and ML as well. And one of the industries that manages to find everything you have ever done ever in your life are the credit agencies. So if you think about the technologies credit agencies use, right? It doesn't matter if you didn't pay a parking ticket in New Jersey 15 years ago, or if you had a late payment on your credit card last week, or you got a new cell phone yesterday. That technology tracks you everywhere you go and follows the data with you and has all the algorithms that gives you credit scores and things like that. And if you take some of that type of technology and apply it to healthcare, right? So encryption keys that allow us through blockchain technology to really follow a patient longitudinally anywhere you exist. No physician that sees you should have to wonder what was done to you, what comprehensive biomarker panels you've had done, what treatments you've had done. All of that should be comprehensive in a single place. And it shouldn't be incumbent upon the patient to have to go find all of that information and carry it with them, right? And so, this is not just about drug development. It's not just about patient treatment. It is about kind of the infrastructure that supports healthcare overall as well, right?
Yes, very well said. And patient has the universal access wherever they go, right? And the physician has a universal sort of overview of the patient's history.
I mean, we used to joke about the big public hospitals in India where people would walk around with a 5 or 6 inch chart under their arm and carry it from department to department. But in some ways, at least they had all of their information with them every time they saw a physician, right? And so—
Oh my God, interestingly, you're reminding me of my childhood file. Because of my high myopia, I still have a big ledger file
Yeah.
But
again, you know, we've got to solve these problems, and they're not easy. And I think that, you know, for caregivers, for providers, for patients, much of this starts with education. If you think about what happened with the breast cancer community, you know, the breast cancer community and the patient groups in breast cancer very early on had to educate themselves around hormone receptor status, right? And then it was what was HER2, and then it was to make that action what was Herceptin. And so and it's a super complex disease with 7 or 8 different lines of therapies, and doesn't include radiation, and how long do you suppress your hormones. But that community has done a phenomenal job at educating themselves, right? And looking at biomarker status. And so how do you take lessons learned? So with what you're doing, Terry, on the KRAS kickers and diseases that are relatively new to the biomarker status, how do we really educate those communities and take what has been done in some other communities that are a little bit further advanced and apply those to it?
Mhm.
And the power
Yeah,
of social media, share more of your journeys, right? Your voice should be heard. And I think that will bring more sort of, how do I say about it? See, I always say this to the industry, and especially in the patient advocacy interactions, is the science and innovation, that power of hope that's coming. It's so tremendous and amazing that if I hear from a patient and a patient advocate about technology and advancements in innovation, that's really, really empowering and enlightening for all the efforts that we are putting, the billions of dollars and the time that we are putting. And Terry, kudos to you, because I heard through you that patients should advocate for artificial intelligence. That's amazing to hear. They're representing the patient communities. Thank you for that.
Well, anybody needs to, you know, any patient knows that they're fighting for their life, and whatever it takes to kind of move that forward. You know, whether you love technology or you hate technology, it's here to stay. And so let's use it for what it is we can benefit from, you know, and in our communities, you know, some of these oncogenes have been discovered many years ago, but just now we're identifying that they're potentially actionable. And so there's not just the today, there's where we're going tomorrow. And you know, you get sick, you go to the doctor, you just kind of look at the doctor and you expect him to be able to know what it is he needs to do. And I will never shame a doctor, but I ask all of them, please run the testing, give them the testing. And many patients don't want to know the answers. They may not care what the answer is, but they need to at least have that as an opportunity in order to be able to make, you know, best treatment decisions. And it's not just even for myself. I regularly in my community, and even my kids are all in their 20s, and they're looking at me. It's like, okay, is this something I need to worry about, Mom? It's like, well, it looks like probably not, but we don't really know for sure. And as technology gets further down the road, look at what we're going to learn. You know, look where immunotherapy was 10 years ago. It wasn't. And look where it is today. So it is progress, and we're just like a little piece at a time, but it's a team effort. And so we all need to kind of sound off on it and use the best treatments and every method that it takes in order to get those things for the patients, for our lives.
Mhm. So Ken, you had talked about you know, a lot of different things, the credit card companies, you know, artificial intelligence. You know, there's a lot of emerging technologies that, frankly, healthcare providers have had to at least consider, and I'll use consider in air quotes, right? But what do you believe are, outside of education, what do you believe are some of those other challenges on why healthcare providers are not embracing technology, especially in the wake of COVID, with telehealth and patient engagement being critical in our space for advancement?
Well, I mean, it's a lot, right? It is a lot for any normal human being. It's a lot when you add on trying to run a practice and see all your patients amidst a pandemic. It's just a lot. It's a lot when you have an EHR system that you're going in and out of every day, and you're trying to write e-scripts, and you're trying to schedule, you know, scans and manage all of that. And then you add in the complexity of running a clinical trial where you've got a sponsor that has their own technology for capturing that data and entering that data, and you're having to go in and out of your workflow and remember 19 passwords, and some of those expire. I mean, it is a lot we are expecting of providers to participate in this research process. You know, as an industry on the pharma side, we have not done a very good job at making clinical research accessible to anybody, patients or providers or researchers. And for a long time, I think there was this misconception that one, patients should feel lucky to be in a clinical trial, right? Two, that physicians that participate in trials are lucky to be able to be part of that research process. And you think about those two, but you think about kind of the reverse is the pharmaceutical companies that are making these drugs are benefiting significantly from the people that are part of that process. So, you know, that ecosystem it needs to be both ways. And so when we think about moving forward and leveraging technology, you know, the primary focus should be lowering the barriers to entry for everyone. That is for providers, that is for researchers, and that is for patients. The reality is today for a patient, so, and I'm sure Terry can probably speak to this better than me, you know, if you are a single mother that is in an hourly job, so lower socioeconomic status, and you have cancer and you need to participate in a clinical trial to cure your disease, and the trial requires 1 or 2 visits a week for 3, 4, 5 months, you don't have the opportunity to take time off. You don't have a paid time off opportunity. You don't have the luxury to go and find childcare for your children you may have so you can go to the clinic. You certainly can't spend 4, 5, 6 hours at the clinic while you get your pre-clearance labs, your reviews, go to radiology, go to your surgical pathology. You know, when you go through all those pieces, that's an entire day. You know, we have created a biased system by creating clinical protocols that are so incredibly complex that the only people that can participate in them are a very finite group of people. And, you know, quite honestly, they tend to be people in higher socioeconomic status who have better healthcare already. And so that barrier is simply too high. And whether it's cancer or rheumatoid arthritis or a CNS disease, the barrier to disease management or cure should not be so high that only a select few get it. So that's kind of one piece that's a challenge. But for researchers as well, you know, if you are requiring to participate in a trial that a study coordinator is 150 or 200 page CRF, that they're having to go and enter data from an EHR manually into an EDC system, how are they going to do that and do their day job and take care of patients? What they're there for, right? And so you're asking them to sacrifice one for the other, and it's just not achievable. And you think about the community setting. So when Kamala talks about 70 or 80% of the oncology patients sit in the community setting today, the bulk of those community centers don't have the staff to do that. And so why we focus on technology is we want to make sure that those sites have an equal footing to participate in research, that those patients have equal chances. The first way is to enable technology so that the average site doesn't have to re-enter all that data. We have technology today that can pull data from an EHR into an EDC system, and 70 or 80% of that is structured data. So that is done and doable. The other piece is for patients where we can. We should virtualize or make as much of that visit virtual as possible. They can go to their local labs to get their labs done. They can use telehealth or telemedicine for check-in visits. We can use remote patient monitoring for vital signs. So much of that can be done at home to lower the barrier to entry for patients. Now, clearly in oncology, it's different, right? We are going to have visits where you have scans and you know, your pathology done and things like that, but where we can minimize the burden on that visit. So instead of 5 or 6 hours, maybe it's an hour or 2 at the clinic. I think there's that. The challenge we have with the institutions is that everything I'm talking about requires an institution to participate as well, which requires the chief information officer, the chief data officer, the technology officer, and finally our favorite group, the legal team and privacy officers, to all agree that letting somebody utilize technology in your system is actually okay. Now, I would argue, you know, companies like Google and Microsoft, I mean, there are lots of companies out there that have refined cybersecurity. Everybody is focused on HIPAA compliance. Those technologies exist today. What we struggle with is a lack of will in those kind of towers that hold all the power in these institutions to play together nicely in a way that puts the patient at the front. Every day I hear lots of excuses, right? Why we can't do this, why we can't do that. Every time somebody holds up a contract for 5, 6, 7, 8 weeks, you can calculate the number of people that have died of the tumor that you're trying to cure. And so I try to remind people when we have these conversations, this is not just a conversation about a contract. It's not a conversation about, are we comfortable with the privacy? It's not a conversation about HIPAA. It's a conversation about what the impact is if we don't do this. And I think lots of times we forget there are patient lives at the other end, right? The Terrys that are out there, they don't care if your legal department is hung up on one indemnification line, right? Because that impacts their ability to live another day, to see their grandkids, to see their kids. And so, you know, we've got to bring this conversation back to why we got into the business that we're in. And deploying technology should not be the barrier, it should be the solution. And so, you know, a lot of the pieces we have is, I don't think it's a lack of wanting. I think some of it is a lack of will. And I think at the individual provider level, some of it's completely out of their hands. It's the institutional level. And so how do you bring all of those pieces together and inform everybody of the value proposition we are trying to provide them with technology? That was my soapbox for the day. You know, I feel like it's just very frustrating to me to see patients succumb to bureaucracy. I mean, we saw it with, if you think about Ebola, you know, during Ebola, at the height of the crisis back in Western Africa, we lost almost 45 days while Doctors Without Borders and the World Health Organization negotiated their contracts to get the people into the Congo to treat those patients. You can look at the number of patients in the death curve while that was negotiated. I mean, that is just unimaginable to me, right? I would have put everybody in the room with a bunch of people with Ebola. I bet it would have got done quicker, right? And so people have to have a stake in the game. Until you have people you know that have cancer, that have passed away, I think it's hard to imagine what the impact is.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, really well said. Let me shift this over to Dr. Braxton and Terry. What should solution providers and CROs like PRA be thinking about that maybe they're not, from your perspective, to improve recruitment in biomarker-based clinical trials? You know, I know we've talked a little bit about technology. We've talked a little bit about artificial intelligence. We talked a little bit about Star Trek. Let me start with you, Terry. Is there anything that, you know, from the solution provider side, whether it's PRA as a CRO or Deep Lens as a solutions provider, are there things that that would potentially help improve recruitment?
You know, I think it's all of the above is the simple answer. It's a matter of everybody has skin in the game, but not everybody is risking their life like the patient and the patient's family is. And so it's a matter of everybody needs to be willing to step up. And whether, you know, if I, you know, to say like, you know, whether I'm the single mom dealing with something and I'm dealing with the information, I don't have time to be sick. Nobody has time to be sick. And so we need to take the knowledge that we have in order to move forward with it. And there's going to be solutions at every step of the way that we all need to work together. It's a team, right? It's simply a team effort. And so it does start with getting patients diagnosed, and that means getting that next gen testing. That means finding out what the biomarkers are and not just what's driving it today, but keeping track of all that information so that we can look forward to it, so that when something does pop later on down the road and there is an actual treatment that applies to me, right? And I mean, yes, trials are important because trials lead to therapy and trials lead to cures, right? Potentially. And so that's what we need to keep in mind, because my goal is for me and everybody else to get the cure, right? Well, that's going to take the trials and takes the information. So we kind of like have to reverse engineer it. So anything that the patients need to do, the patients need to be willing to do. And that involves giving blood and giving the pathology and doing whatever it is we need to do over the HIPAA. And it does require that, you know, the institutions are there to help. And we use each little piece of the puzzle that we have in order to really accomplish it.
Mhm, mhm. How about a brief comment from you, Dr. Braxton? I know we're running out of time. I think we only have about 5 minutes left in total for our webinar. Any brief comments from your perspective, Dr. Braxton?
Sure, yeah, and I'll try to keep it brief. So we have to increase the testing rates. We've seen, any numbers have quoted what's, common in the community from 66% to 75% of patients that need testing actually get it. So that's still, 1/3 to a quarter of patients just aren't getting the comprehensive biomarker testing that they deserve. So finding some technological ways of providing, better access to testing would be very helpful. I also want to mention care pathways because that's something that we're seeing a lot of right now. Now, community hospitals have always had care pathways, but those have been for, strokes or heart attacks. Somebody comes in with chest pain, they go through that care pathway through the ER. Now, most of our care pathways for oncology are outpatient based, and that's where you have a breakdown between hospital systems and community providers being not underneath the same roof, so to speak. So that is a challenge for oncology communities, and it's also an opportunity for some of the CROs to say, what are those care pathways? Can we facilitate those with some of that, as Kent mentioned, portable information, interoperable information? Can you understand where a ovarian cancer patient is in their care pathway and help facilitate all those connections between their outpatient providers? I think that's a very interesting way to approach better care and assessing clinical research as the standard of care in the future here.
Great. Well, I think we have about 3 minutes left. Time flies. Is there any questions from the audience? I don't see any in the chat panel. Is there any questions? Please make sure you put them in the chat panel, and we'd be happy to address those with the remaining few minutes. Okay. All right. I don't see any coming through. There was actually one that came through for Dr. Madali. Question is, I've read a little bit about Deep Lens. Can you give me a quick 30-second on who Deep Lens is?
Who Deep Lens is? So Deep Lens is an artificial intelligence technology player based on what we discussed about the various real life scenarios here. One of the biggest issues is obviously, right, the clinical research workflow. What is happening at the site? Despite what you are engaging the patients, bringing awareness of the trials and everything, once the patient is actually seeing a doctor, one of the biggest challenges in the industry today is how to identify your own patients in the sites or in the health systems, then surface them to the top, and then provide them clinical research or clinical trial as a care option as soon as possible, and also have seamless visibility about the patient's history and track record. Like Dr. Braxton has indicated, there are multiple testing that's being done on this very patient. Today's EMR, electronic medical record, doesn't capture all of this information. So it's scattered everywhere in 10 different places. Deep Lens is providing seamless visibility to natural language processing and semantic annotation and data model standardization. And you would get a comprehensive overview of the patient, which would actually build very simple attributes like mimicking a clinical trial protocol. Then the clinical research coordinator at the site is logging into the Deep Lens solution, which is AI-enabled web-based, cloud-based application. You would actually have a very simplistic view, but with the most comprehensive information about the patient. And it would also match the patient with the ongoing trials within that site or within that network of sites. And also the beauty is, despite if the patient is enrolled into a trial or not, deep lens AI solution longitudinally follows the patient. So that way they might be eligible for any sort of future trials or even real world data insights. A lot is happening for all the approved precision medicine therapies or oncology therapies. I think the commercial outreach the industry is taking is still very conservative. That's why many of the therapies out there and treatments are sitting on the shelves. We are taking the classic cookie cutter pathways. But to understand the communities and also the disparities and the differences between the bigger centers, academic centers, and community networks, and then cater your medical affairs activities, MSL activity, and the pharma rep activity accordingly, and then leverage community outreach programs, which should actually bring more and more awareness about the treatments that foster better adoption of treatments, not only better adoption of trials. That's where people stand.
Great, thank you. I did just receive a quick comment. I know we're over our time, but the comment was, that was over 30 seconds with a smiley face. No. Well, I wanted to thank everybody. Thank you, panelists. Thank you, Dr. Braxton. Thank you, Terry. Thank you, Kent. Thank you, Kamala, for this great hour. I know it was extremely beneficial for me, and I'm hopeful it was for the entire audience. So thanks again, and appreciate the time. Take care.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, everyone. Yep.
Thanks.